Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Joe, good to see you again. And Ryan, super excited to have you on today. For those of you who are not familiar with Ryan, Ryan is the co-founder of Bendable Therapy out in Bend, Oregon. And Bendable Therapy, offers a really unique piece of the puzzle out there in Oregon. And, Ryan, I'd love to have you sort of explain why Bendable is so important, and then what gap does it fill within the Oregon infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Happy to be here and chat about what we're doing out in Oregon. Um, so Oregon had legalized psilocybin and started issuing licenses last year, beginning of last year. And I think the important thing to note there was they made it non-medical. So psilocybin access is non-medical. You don't need a prescription. You don't need a referral, which is, I think, fantastic. The intent there was to increase access. But in the initial rules, they took that a little too far and made it where it can't be medical. So there's actually a big divide between the psilocybin services and any sort of mental health treatment. And so those have to be separate. And so we kind of hit this rocky start at the beginning of last year where the service centers, the psilocybin service centers were opening, but they couldn't employ therapists. They couldn't have facilitators who are also providing therapy to their clients. And this was kind of positioned and passed on the idea that it would be psilocybin assisted therapy. But in the initial rollout, that was kind of not what we got. And so what we created with Bendable Therapy was sort of this bridge to connect the mental health providers with psilocybin services. So we created a service center, a licensed legal framework, and that's where psilocybin sessions occur. We also created Bendable Therapy, which is a nonprofit that provides the navigation, the client screening. It can talk about therapy. It can do this more medicalized screening and intake and referrals to therapists and facilitators who can then work within the license framework. So kind of a little bit of a complicated workaround, but it's ended up working really well in creating this opportunity to create a better ecosystem within this new Oregon model.
Totally. Now, do you guys actually employ therapists yourself, or do you just refer, or is there a screening program for the therapists that you do refer to?
Yeah, so it's a little all over the place. Bendable Therapy itself, everyone who works there, except for me, has a mental health background or license. And they're the ones doing the screening, the intake. And then we have a network of what we'll call preferred providers. And those are both therapists who are supportive and knowledgeable of psilocybin sessions. And then we also have facilitators, so licensed psilocybin facilitators in our network who we have vetted and kind of meet that higher acuity and demand for mental health patients and clients. Yeah.
Wow. That is a pretty complicated workaround, but it sounds like it's been going really well for you guys. Because it is drastically different than what's going on in New Jersey. For those who are unfamiliar, New Jersey is a medical model. It is specific around therapy. There's a lot of importance placed on therapy. And what I think was really interesting, a question that came up in one of the, I believe it was the Health and Human Services testimony hearing. One of the questions, or actually a couple of the questions that came up was like, how will this process, meaning the integration, the prep integrate administration integration, how will that impact the relationship with their primary mental health provider? Like, do you guys see that it just kind of integrates well? I saw on your website, there's a little bit of a pull off here into the Bendable model, and then where they go back into, maybe their regular mental health provider, their primary care provider in that sense. How do those two pieces sort of come back in together?
Right. Now, where we've tried to position Bendable is supporting the idea that psilocybin assists therapy. So you already have a mental health journey. You are already actively seeking out alleviation of your symptoms, diagnosis, whatever that may be. And you and ideally your provider have discussed psilocybin and have decided, hey, maybe that's a useful tool, something that can support this existing journey. And that's where the client would apply to Bendable Therapy. In their intake, they talk about their current mental health journey, their path, their plan. And we talk to them from the beginning in the preparation of, here's the psilocybin services, here's how this path is going to lay out with prep, session, integration, but most importantly, always angling for how are you bringing that back to your existing mental health journey? What support exists there? What's your ongoing plan and path? Because just seeking out psilocybin by itself, it can be interesting, it can be enlightening, it can be mystical, but unless you take that somewhere and work with it, the benefits aren't lasting, is what we've seen. When we have one facilitator puts it that psilocybin doesn't do the treatment, it gives you homework. So it's something to take back. And we start that discussion from the very beginning of how to integrate it. And then we also provide, we started locally, but we're kind of expanding this to education and seminars for mental health providers. So a lot of mental health providers have their clients coming and saying, hey, I read an article about psilocybin. Will it work? And mental health provider can't reliably say, right? They don't know. They don't know that educated on it. And so we are starting to engage with them and providing education workshops to let them know what psilocybin is, what it isn't, when it's appropriate, when it's not, and how to expand that knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece, right? And something that I have heard Denise Rue, who we had on last week, she's an LCSW in New Jersey, has had a long, big, extensive background facilitating. That so many people come with this, where they've literally tried everything, and they come almost like, well, this is the thing that is going to save me, and kind of reframing that is such an important piece. That's awesome. That's part of your conversation from the beginning. Like, you save you or heal you, and this is an amazing tool, and that I love that gives you homework, because that's so powerfully the truth.
I think that's an overall narrative too in psychedelics that you see. You have the one pill cure, and that's really not the case. Although it's attractive, I think, when you're messaging psychedelics and wanting to get people to buy in, because we do know how effective they are. It's an attractive pitch, but I think it can backfire a bit, because if it's just one and done, then why do you need all this? Why do you need a structure around it? Why can't you just set up a place where people take it and then leave and they're done? And so I think it is kind of a backfire, isn't it? So I think it's a message that gets you in the door, gets a lot of headlines, and probably perks up a lot of people's ears, and it'd be tempting to use it. But yeah, then you miss out on everything that really is a little more nuanced.
Yeah. And what I really love, this idea of involving education for providers. Joe and I have actually talked about that as part of, we're still figuring out exactly where Psychedelic League wants to put a focus of its energy, but the importance of educating, mental health care providers. There's still so much, even within that community, there's still hesitation and stigma and all of these other pieces. Have you guys officially launched that piece, or is that something that's in development?
Yeah, our first education seminar was in January of this year. And so we do that quarterly. And then at the end of this month, we have our first, we call it Heal the Healers. It's a small group psilocybin session for mental health practitioners with the angle of, great, bring whatever work you want to do, but also this is education through experience. If you want to know what this is, come do it. So that'll be launching at the end of this month, and we hope to do those as frequently as we can.
Oh man, it's so funny, because I know often some of us, who are such big fans of this are like, man, if all of Congress could just do this, those who would qualify and all those pieces. But it is such a, I'm going to say this, it's like hard not to become somewhat evangelical around it when you've had the experience, and it's hard not to become a supporter when you've seen it in yourself and seen it for yourself. And to be able to speak to a patient, for them, patient, client, whatever language they use, from personal experience, I think goes very far in helping somebody to feel a little more comfortable.
Agreed. Yeah.
Totally.
So what have you seen on the insurance front, Ryan, when it comes to getting coverage for these services? Because we've had some interesting conversations recently where it may not be as far away as we thought. how are you looking at integrating that into Bendable or any other aspect of the business?
Yeah, I mean, so insurance would be great, right? I mean, that would be one big proponent of access here. We launched a scholarship fund, so we do provide scholarships to those who request it, partial to full. And that was our initial response of here, how can we push this forward? And that fund is filled primarily from people who pay the full price. So it's a kind of pay it forward model. That was our first push, and that's helped pave the way for some other partnerships that we're talking through. Again, one nice thing about Bendable Therapy isn't a psilocybin license holder. It partners with the license holders. That means that Bendable Therapy doesn't touch such Schedule 1 drug. So it's not, in the eyes of the government, a drug trafficker, which frees it up and is much easier to work with. In terms of these partnerships. So, for example, Bendable Therapy now can accept health savings accounts, so HSA payments that way. So we are slowly beginning to expand the types of payments we can receive. A lot of that's due to the work we're doing in the education and the legitimacy, but also we've got this kind of arm's length from touching the actual Schedule 1 substance. And then we are in talks with insurance carriers who are, there actually is, I've been really surprised, a big interest in this. And they're just going through all of the regulatory and compliance work they need to do right now, again, to make sure that they're not touching a Schedule 1 substance or directly supporting it. Has to go through a middle person, all that. But insurance, I will say, is moving along faster than I thought it would be. And it's very possible something happens this year, which would be amazing.
That's really brilliant, to kind of like pull out and separate. Joe and I were having a conversation with somebody yesterday around this about building a little bit of like a wall, between the substance itself. In that space, does it matter where you send the money? If you're funding, for example, funding somebody's experience, does that have it play any role, or is that another unique situation?
We can get pretty far off into the weeds here for how do you protect this. One big example is like for funding the services, the money goes to the client rather than directly to the licensed service center. So the client acts as the go-between. They are the ones paying for services. You are funding the client. That's a really good way to create that separation between. So it's not a B2B transaction. You're using the client as the kind of the mitigation there, so that the money is not directly going between spots.
Yeah, I mean, because it feels like it'll be quite some time before it's not Schedule 1. We're still looking at, even just marijuana or cannabis. Just that's something very recently, and it's been around for so long. So it's going to take a lot of data for that to sort of come online. So I imagine these kind of solutions are going to be a big part of how we support people through this process moving forward.
Right. Until there's descheduling. I mean, you have cannabis, even if it's moving down in the schedules, it's still a scheduled drug. It's controlled. Still, you have the 280E tax issues, which means effectively you can't take standard deductions like it's more expensive to run a business, right? So yeah, this model is really innovative, and I think people have thought about it. I know a lot of people in Oregon who are thinking about this are thinking of structures, but I think that like tax structures, right? But this is even more than a tax structure. This is more of a model to actually give the value that the legislation has stripped out, right? What's your understanding of why Oregon stripped out that the value, the ability for I guess practitioners or others to give that value to the patients that you're now giving to them?
Yeah, no, that was kind of it was just a legislative oversight. Like they were enthusiastic about making it non-medical and non-directive. Non-directive is the phrase they keep going back to. So that's in the law. That was what the voters voted on in the ballot measure. This was a non-directive, non-medical service, and I believe so that's Oregon state law, and then Oregon Health Authority interprets and implements those laws through their rules. And it's at that interpretation phase is where they said, well, if it's non-medical and non-directive, if there was a therapist or a provider involved in this, that would be a little too directive. if you're trying to help a client meet their needs and their objectives, you're directing them towards that goal. And this is non-directive. The OHA, to their credit, has started to back off their interpretation of non-directive. But that's going to be something that needs to be switched at the legislative level, is basically get rid of that non-directive phrase, because it's hard to work with that. And that's also scaring off there are a lot of therapists, mental health providers who went to go get their facilitator license and then are starting to learn that they're at risk with their original license if they practice. So if their license is governed by a national board, they could lose their LCSW if they are also supporting psilocybin services, which is federally illegal. Colorado is doing an amazing thing where they're putting it into the law that's protected. You can't lose your license. Right. Oregon, that's going to be another legislative change, but there are groups moving towards that. Hopefully that happens within the next year, is that the mental health license holders can be protected if they are also supporting facilitation. So all that to say, I believe it was a legislative oversight in how they wrote the rules, and it's just taking the normal time it takes to correct and mitigate that back to the true intent.
I mean, to Oregon's credit and everyone involved's credit, I think it's trial and error, right? How would you know how this all would play out? It's a lot of pieces to put together. And
absolutely.
Colorado's
The hindsight is like, oh, why did it go this way? But I mean, we're doing it. We have access. Yes, we're playing these workarounds and trying to make this work, but we're doing it. And Oregon is pioneering this, and it's incredible. So
it's so true. It's so much better to be just positive and optimistic. It's like, we're doing the work. It's in place. No one else has done it. It's easy to be, to use hindsight to nitpick things, personally, we don't buy into the in New Jersey legislation and moving through the Assembly and the Senate, some people don't want to mention Oregon because of there's headlines, but I think Oregon gets a lot of credit for taking the first go. Anybody who takes the first go is going to have some issues, and then you fix it like you're doing, ad hoc, and then you do it with legislation or rulemaking, which takes a little longer, right? So, go ahead, Sarah.
So I was going to ask you, isn't New Jersey actually writing in or working alongside some of the medical boards to provide a level of protection? Do you know if that's still happening?
Yeah, there's to paraphrase, there is a part of the legislation that states that effectively, you can't be penalized for participating or for offering services. I'd have to pull up the legislation to find the exact site, but yeah, New Jersey also, like Colorado, isn't preventing, like for instance, the Board of Medical Advisors. If you're a doctor who's referring under New Jersey proposed law, referring patients to facilitators or to a service center, you can't be penalized for doing that. Yeah. Now, we'd have to maybe do we'll need to do a deep dive into what are the bounds of it. Can a doctor also facilitate? And can a doctor also perhaps maybe owning a service center and actually being plant touching or drug touching might be different than just following along with what they're allowed to do. But we're looking to dig into that. Yeah,
that'll be interesting. I do know that there's no they do say very specifically that there's no self-referral, and you cannot refer to yourself or for a family member, so that piece of separation is going to exist, but whether or not they can actually that's as you guys called it the other day, plant touching.
But you have to have a medical director who's a licensed physician in New Jersey. So, and they have to get paid, but does that mean that they can't have equity too? There's a lot of questions. And that's what we're looking forward to as we're able to slowly flesh that out and put that out there so people can start planning accordingly. This is all, of course, with the hopes that New Jersey actually gets passed, cautiously optimistic. So what is Bendable looking to move to to other states? Are you looking to expand, Ryan, to other jurisdictions, other places?
Yeah, I mean, we've resisted scaling. I think a lot of the benefit we've had with being small is being nimble and being able to react to and adapt to the rules which are changing all the time, and just kind of the market. That's what's allowed us to. I can talk about this great format we've created, but this is like the 800th business plan over the past year and a half. So I think we are hesitant to just jump into other states. We definitely promote anyone else who wants to see if they can carry the torch that we've created. So we do collaborate often with other people and basically support them with our knowledge gained so far and say, hey, here's how it worked for us, run with it. But I think, especially, it's still so new. I think yesterday was our 1-year anniversary for our first client.
Congrats.
Thanks. So that's still so new that we don't want to scale and then have something change that we can't adapt to. And I think that'd be an advice just generally to people getting into this field is stay a little small until things settle out.
Right. That's great advice, I think, generally. So what do you see as far as like, this is kind of pivoting, let's say, what do you see in Oregon or elsewhere? Let's just say Oregon. Let's stay focused. 10 years from now, what do you see that the market looks like, or the the offerings, the services?
Yeah, I think, and so looking at what we've seen so far, right, was this opened up as non-medical. No one knew what the market would be, who was going to be seeking this out. What we've seen across service centers, and especially at Bendable Therapy, 85% of the individuals seeking services are self-reporting a mental health diagnosis. So it is a medical need that people are looking for here. And I think that surprised people. I think there was this thought that this would be like, psychonauts or experiential or wellness. But it's really the market, especially right now, is that mental health diagnosis crowd. So I think the market's going to shift to address that. And hopefully the regulation starts to loosen up and allow that, as it's going to allow mental health providers to also be facilitators, and to kind of streamline that process. So I think 10 years from now is really far away. Let's just say 5 years.
I was thinking that myself. I'm like, 10 years is pretty far. Let's say 5. Yeah.
So 5 years from now, what I imagine, and this is total conjecture, is that we're going to see the first situation. So right now, for a client to receive psilocybin services, they have to go to a licensed service center, which is a very highly regulated, structured building. A lot of it was based off cannabis. So there's just an incredible amount of security and land use and all of these restrictions. Very hard to find a space where you can do this, which drives up costs. But you have to go to that space. You have to be with a licensed facilitator. You have to have licensed product, tested a licensed lab, all that regulatory compliance. What that's leaving out is a big demand and need with end-of-life care, palliative care. There are people that can't travel to a service center. And there's already motions in place to allow, in those cases, for facilitators to go to the client. That'll probably start with at home. That might open up at some point to in a hospital. And I think that's going to be where we first start to see this break away from the service center model. It puts more agency in the facilitator, where there's already quite a bit there. And we start to see that open up. And from there, it's a pretty quick jump to what Oregon would probably love to do next, is just dispensary model. So they'll say, okay, well, if the facilitators are able to take this to different places, it's now leaving the boundary of the service center. Maybe we can do take home microdose kits or other things that start to break down that wall. So I'd imagine within 5 years, we've got a loosening of the service center requirement for services that'll start with medical need, and then it'll open up to some initial take home to consumer, so retail, essentially, and kind of grow from there. And that'll start to split the very medical kind of structure, and you'll see insurance coming in. You'll see that get developed, and a lot of that still be at service center, still be clinic based. But you'll start to see this kind of path for other modalities coming in. It's kind of my vision.
I mean, that sounds reasonable. and in that vision, where you have a dispensary model where it's either open to, adults to buy, or maybe directly facilitators can buy from a dispensary and then go use it in facilitating. How do you maintain community? Which seems to be consensus is it's a huge part of the benefit of psychedelics generally, which is why we like group sessions and such.
Yeah, I think what's been interesting is watching that develop, right? Like 85% of our folks are coming here with a mental health diagnosis, and they're used to Western individualist medicine, where the idea of group actually they don't like. We talk about the benefits of group, but that's a kind of a big step to overcome. We're seeing that loosen up. That's still going to take a few years. I believe the demand for that will eventually sort of increase, and that'll be a bonus rather than right now it's viewed as like a cost savings thing. And why would I want to go do this as a group? This is my healing. But as people start to see that there's a bigger benefit to that, I think that market will naturally develop. In Oregon, I think that's where the service centers will start to move more towards group-based, larger spaces. Through a lot of land use restrictions, we're kind of stuck in the single office space kind of format. There's only a couple service centers in the state that have group rooms. And anyway, yeah, I think that education will grow. People will become aware that the group dynamic is great. And what we're already seeing are the ancillary services, integration circles that aren't tied to service centers, different psychedelic support groups, organizations just are popping up and are actually very well attended. And that's where the community will really start to develop. Some of those can be like Bendable Therapy is leading integration circles. We're expanding that as a community base. But integration is such a broad topic. I think that'll just naturally, and it already is, kind of develop as an ancillary market to support those kind of things. I don't think it's where you're like, oh, community is important for psilocybin, you have to force the community. I think the psilocybin naturally lends itself to that community generation and let it happen.
Totally. When somebody has had that experience, trying to explain that to experience or connect with somebody on that experience who has no idea what you're talking about, like there's just such a disconnect. So being with others to be able to kind of talk through that integration and share, it resonates so differently when somebody has been in that space. I'm really, go ahead, Joe. I was going to pivot a little bit to the annual report. Go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead on that's a great topic.
Yeah, so I'm really, I took some time the other day and just sat out in the sunshine with a highlighter and pen around the annual report. And one of the things that Joe and I've been talking about is, how do we go whenever we're talking to municipalities, when we look at, in New Jersey, there is no ability to tax this on a municipal level. So where is the benefit to the municipality? Where is it, rather than making money? Because, every municipality is like, well, if I'm going to do this, put this work, what am I getting out of it? And rather like shifting that conversation towards, well, where is this like a cost savings for you? And, I'm curious if you guys in your future data collection, if you're going to dive, I'm going to kind of let you sort of illuminate some of the highlights that you feel like you've seen, but I'd love to dive into like what additional information you may be collecting in the future, because there's a few pieces that I'd love to see.
And just before we go on, like maybe just an overview what this report is. Because I don't know if we mentioned it earlier, 30 minutes ago.
Yeah. So there's a lot of data is important, and there's a big interest in outcomes, who's seeking services, all of these aspects, especially in the wild now. All the psilocybin information has been clinical, and now I've got this is field based. The screening is less intense. It's the public accessing. Oregon implemented SB 303, which is a bill to start to try and get some demographic information. We feel it's actually pretty limited. That doesn't launch until next year, and it doesn't really look at outcomes. And there's also the licensed centers themselves and facilitators, rightly so. Client confidentiality is very important, but the rules are in place such that it's very hard for a service center to even gather aggregate data on their population served. So it's that information is hard to get out there. That's Bendable. One of the benefits of not being a license holder, and that it's this referral system, and that it's essentially a concierge to these clients. It can engage the clients more, and if the clients are willing, their data can be used and aggregated, shared, compiled, and create a photograph of who's actually seeking services. And then on the tail end, if they want to, Bendable does follow-ups and can also collect that information. And so what we're able to do over the first year, and this was this annual report, was just looking at our first, I believe 100 clients to come through and just say, hey, why did you seek services? And that's where a lot of this information for 85% mental health diagnosis. Over 50% were over the age of 50, equal split, male, female, all that kind of demographic information. And then also looking at outcomes. And we can share some of the highlights on that. I think so, just like in terms of meeting their intentions, mental health diagnosis, how important was it for alleviating that? 68% said extremely effective. And remaining 19% saying moderately. I think, 65% said the transformations were permanent or very long lasting. And 87% said that it was a positive impact on their life. One of my favorites was over 90% strongly agree that compared to before the session, they are now able to think in new or different ways. And we'll be able to share this report out so people can sit out in the sun with a highlighter as well and go through it. But I think generally it's like this was our initial screen of folks coming through, and the outcomes were great. They're very positive. And I think one way you can look to a municipality and say, how is this going to benefit is a lot of these individuals have been seeking mental health care for decades. They come have psilocybin as an intervention, and now they've stepped way back on their need for a therapist or mental health professional. They're still seeing them, but instead of twice a week, maybe it's once a month, right? You start to alleviate the burden on local mental health resources. We have some partnerships looking at opioid addiction. We have participants coming through alcohol and other substance use disorders. So in terms of just a burden on local healthcare, this is a pretty effective path. And these initial numbers are still more anecdotal. Starting in March of this year, we launched a formal research project. Osmind is our partner on that. And we'll be doing 9 months of basically all the intake, screening, all that information. We have some information gathered the day of the session, and then 1 week and 30-day post-session surveys. So we can actually see outcomes, follow those through a much more granular level with the demographics, with their intentions and needs. And that information, that report should be published early next year. And that's going to be a much more detailed and actually it's going to be great. I'm excited to see what comes of that. Our research director will tell me not to be so optimistic about the good results, that it's the results are the results, but based on what we've seen so far, it is positive. And this is going to be able to communicate, especially municipalities, like, hey, this is, you might not see a dollar amount tied directly to the sessions, but this is alleviating a burden on the already strained mental health system.
Yeah. We've been doing this research looking for what are the needs of these counties and cities, and you find these reports that are prepared by these various groups, like groups of like a League of U.S. Cities, like the National Association of Counties, and they all say the same thing: we're in a national mental and behavioral health crisis. It's taxing all of our resources. Here's all the things that are reported to us by these mayors. There's even the New Jersey League of Municipalities itself has a mayor's mental health initiative. So, I mean, this is on their radar. And so then if you can pull this data together and give it to them and say, not only is this effective, but it can alleviate the burden on your local government. If you could tie, that's what we're working to tie together. So the reports like yours are crucial because it's specific to psilocybin, there's no other way to get it. The the field data doesn't exist otherwise, right? Other than beyond Arrowwood or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're this is one being at the forefront here, Oregon. Everyone might remember Measure 110 passed at the same time as legalization of psilocybin was the decriminalization of essentially all drugs in Oregon, which has since been pulled back. What's not highlighted in that measure with the decriminalization was an incredible amount of funding for mental health resources. And those are distributed by the county. And because Measure 109 kind of happened at the same time, we're fine. It's taken time, but that money is still out there. That part of Measure 110 is still great in that it's trying to fund county initiatives. And so now we're talking to the county about how we can get that to seed the psilocybin service centers and sessions coming on here. So there's avenues now where the county sees like, no, not only do we have this money spent for mental health resources, like here is a great avenue to put that. So it's happening. It's slow.
Yeah, of course. Especially if you can couch it. Oh, sorry. Especially if just one last throw out there. Especially if you can couch it in an impact on their direct workforce, right? These counties are large employers, and the cities employ a lot of people. Like usually, a county, like a county's prosecutor's office is like the largest law firm, one of the largest law firms, effectively in the in the area. So I mean, they have their own workforces who would, if you can point to the data saying this would increase productivity or reduce, expenses on our municipal, insurance expenses effectively, it all ripples up like that.
And this was an interesting one. I'll throw it out because we didn't foresee this. A lot of the conservative counties in Oregon pushed back on allowing psilocybin services. They had the opportunity to opt out. And like one of the number one reasons counties were saying that they didn't want psilocybin services is that it would be this massive increase in emergency service calls. That service centers were going to have people screaming, running in the streets, and it was just going to be this added burden to emergency services. We've now been in operation for over a year. Central Oregon has 4 service centers. We've had 0 emergency service calls in the past year. Across the entire state, 29 service centers, thousands and thousands of sessions. There have been 3 emergency service calls in the past 18 months. And it's not even known if those are even psilocybin related. But that's great information, right? That this isn't a burden on the system, and it's hopefully only improving.
Yeah, I mean, that whole EMS thing is such a big misnomer or piece of misinformation that it's made its way into the New Jersey's bill. Having an EMS service on call at all times for every service center is a requirement. And it's just like, okay, that makes sense. I mean, you don't not want that, but the idea of having to do it outside just the normal course of 911, like, does a bar have to have an EMS service lined up? They should, but as we know, they should have one even more than a psilocybin service center should. But yeah, I think they're going to dispel themselves, those myths, especially as reports like yours come out. And it's like, listen, I know it's just Oregon, but they're the first ones doing it. And this is what they've done after, thousands of people, 3 people, less than 1%, 1% of 1%. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, that's actually a question that came up in another conversation I was having when we were looking at that regulation, that law, that part of the bill about the requirement of the medical director and the requirement of EMS. And it's like, well, but how many have happened in Oregon? So thank you for that. So only 3. It'd be interesting to see details of that. Was it mania? Was it somebody who was fearful that they were, having an MI? Was it, like you said, completely unrelated? That's really, really interesting. I'm curious too. One of the areas, because my background, I'm a nurse. I work in I have a practice in functional medicine, nurse coaching, and so I'm always looking at the ways in which our changes, our behavioral health changes, right? Like how we operate in the day, how we eat, how these plants help change our relationship with our body and the way that we treat it, right? And that has a huge mental health component, where when we are deeply depressed and, people struggle to alter their eating and, lifestyle habits because they have no energy, and the depression sort of like feeds into it. But I'm curious, if there will be any questions within, the next set of data that you're collecting. I noticed that people were reporting that they had made these behavior changes, whether it's, exercise or how they ate or any of those things. And so it'd be interesting to see what ways in which they changed made those lifestyle changes. Because I feel like that's a really interesting data point to be able to start connecting. We know what taking a walk every day, exercising every day does to blood sugar regulation, right? We have information on that. So to be able to connect the impact of, a psychedelic experience to these these lifestyle changes, like where can we start showing an even bigger impact? Because we know I feel like I know pretty well that those exist. It's just a matter of like finding them.
Yeah, and we're not getting that granular. I would love to see that. I'm hoping like we're going to be one of the first research studies published here. So we definitely reeled back in kind of what we wanted to do because we wanted to make this happen. But I'm hoping this kicks off other interest because in a lot of ways, this legalization in Oregon is an experiment. How is this going to work? And we have the opportunity to engage with individuals and really track their progress through deciding to go on the program, going through the program, outcomes, lifestyle changes, and all that. So I'm excited. One thing that I was really surprised with was when we launched the research project, it's totally an opt-in optional thing for clients to seek. I thought maybe we'd get like a 50% interest. Folks are like, yeah, I'm willing to kind of do this research, but I think it's like 97%. People are very excited to be a part of seeing how this works and sharing that information. So yeah, the opportunity is there, I think. And as states come online, it'd be great to see other research kind of track all these little things that we're going to see.
Yeah, I had attended the Horizons conference in New York earlier this year, and I heard a couple of speakers back to back say the same thing, which was that the anecdotal data, like the on the ground data about cannabis, was one of the major factors in the decision to reschedule cannabis. So that was eye-opening because it means that, service centers like yours and like the work that Bendable is doing actually has a actual impact on a national scale, which I hadn't really thought. I thought it was kind of like, state regulated programs are kind of ignored and they're going to look to clinical data or something to make a rescheduling decision. But it was stressed that it's an actual, the field data is actually a major component. So I think we got to keep that in mind. You might already know that, but even if you didn't, it strengthens what you're doing.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And that would be the call I would like to get from the DEA is share the data. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't know if they call you.
Yeah.
I don't know if they probably just, they probably.
But they're watching. That's great.
They're definitely watching you.
Paying attention. Yeah. Well, yeah.
and that's also even, more motivation for organizations to operate like this. If there are all these or to pull back the restrictions on protecting data going through the service centers, if they can't really collect this data, or there's things that get in the way of them, from a privacy standpoint, then we need more avenues who can actually collect that data, or that other side needs to change.
Yeah,
and making sure that there's something whether it's some sort of a reporting, something in place in New Jersey to be collecting that data.
That's something that we had discussed that was raised to us early on, is that, data collection is going to be crucial as part of the legislation. That's another thing that we can learn from Oregon too, is that, maybe perhaps allowing data collection as long as people opt in, right? Because effectively what they said was you can't collect data, if I'm kind of generalizing.
They made it very, very difficult. And then even if we did, it's really hard for that to leave the service center ever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there should maybe be an informed consent type of deal where perhaps there is as you said, it should be there should be strict rules around data. Nobody wants to have to go to a service center and expect their data to be released. But if you want that data to be released, even if it's anonymized, there should be an ability to,
Yeah, as an example of the restrictions that OHA put in place here, we have to get in writing and they have to agree to it. And they have the option of opting out for us to call their emergency contact number. So if we called their emergency contact number that they fill out on the OHA form, we are now disclosing information that the session is going on or occurred to, even though it's, anyway, it's a silly rule.
So
but it's
they have to sign something like before you call, it has to be contemporaneous. Can you say that again?
Yeah. So like if emergency occurred and we had to call 911 or call the emergency contact number that a client listed on their form, when we make that call, if we say, hey, Jane Doe is here, we have an emergency, we've now just disclosed client information to a third party, and that's in violation of the rules. We have to get in writing that we can actually share their name with emergency services or their emergency contact.
I see.
Wow.
And so
that's part of your upfront intake forms. And now, right?
OHA has been very clear. We have to basically get that clearance. And what's interesting, the client can still opt out. And then we're in this situation where we can't disclose that a session's going on when we call emergency services, which is, of course, we're going to call emergency services if we need to.
Right.
But we're in violation of OHA rules by contacting, even if it's a de-identified data. It's really complex.
Yeah, it's just a good example of sometimes it gets too overly restrictive where it even prevents you from helping a person, arguably. Yeah.
Wow, that's it. That's super interesting because, let's say you're in an outpatient surgery center and you have to call, EMS. You share with EMS because it's like a handing over of care. So this is seen different. This isn't a handing over of care or a transfer of care, there is a piece in the New Jersey bill that talks about having a process in place for transferring care. So, hopefully that piece will be really, really helpful in that. But at the same time, as is written right now, the service center cannot hold on to the identification and referral from the referring office. So if the person comes, presents who they are, it says that information cannot be held on to and it has to be destroyed. So it'll be interesting to see, how does that grow? Does it shift? Does the advisory committee run with it, or do they sort of help keep it in a place that makes that sort of transfer of care a little easier?
Ryan, if you could go back again, go into your land use issues, did you do any appearances before any of these boards? Was it done, and what were your takeaways of what questions were asked by these boards that maybe surprised you, if any?
Generally, people are very unaware of what psilocybin services look like. And I did a lot of meetings one-on-one with county commissioners and showed them a picture of somebody laying down with eye shades on. And they were surprised that was what the services look like. I really feel that the idea is that this is Burning Man that we're creating. And there's a lot of education that needs to go into, no, this is therapy. This is a really low resource intensive operation. They're worried about, people coming and going, it being a big party scene. It's like we see one client a day. It's a really slow operation. Their neighbors know what we do, but they don't hear anything from us. We're not a nuisance at all. So the biggest pushback is people thought this is going to be like a party scene. They really view the recreational thing and they equate it to cannabis the most. And there's a lot of education with the boards and commissioners on this is not cannabis. This isn't a recreational product. And then similarly with manufacturing, growing, they thought it'd be like cannabis again, where these giant warehouses pop up that use all the water and have a bunch of light pollution and smell. And it's trying to explain, no, this is one very well-run closet could supply the state. So it's just a lot of education. And that'd be the biggest thing is everyone thought this would be cannabis all over again. And there are rightly some resistance to what happened with cannabis, just exploded here. And so they're trying to push back on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were hearing the same thing recently from someone working in Colorado, that they're at the point now that they're having to engage with towns. They're at that point. They're catching up with Oregon, and they're at that point in the transition, and they're hearing the exact same thing, questions about odor, and it's just it is we have to remember that. I think we're all fully immersed in this enough where we forget that we have to go back all at the beginning, right? And just maybe picturing like a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. The first thing it says is like, this is not cannabis, and just like the top three things it's not. This is not Burning Man. Yeah. What did you bring? Any like visual aids, any tools, anything you could suggest in the future when people in Colorado and New Jersey start approaching people, like any best practices for talking with commissioners or professionals?
Yeah, those items that it's extremely resource minimal, both on manufacturing and the service center. They have a lot of good response to, like, we don't need parking because clients are dropped off and picked up. Like, we're not increasing all of these other concerns you have with running a municipality with high traffic and parking, noise, long hours. Like, nope, we're like a very slow therapy office. Like, I think that resonated well with people understanding the impact locally, low resources, et cetera. And then veterans sharing their stories, both from underground and then now that it's legal, like the sessions of what that looks like and how they're bringing that back to their community. I think, yeah, the veteran stories really resonate, and this is a very supportive process for veterans, so it works really well there, and that's bipartisan, kind of hits across political lines. So the veterans have been very supportive of this, and definitely love working with them.
Yeah, that's just reassuring, because these are the things we've heard. We know it needs to be like low impact for the towns, and we know that veterans are really the best foot forward when it comes to bipartisan, objective consideration, right? Because I think, fortunately or unfortunately, I think psychedelics are looked at as a liberal thing, generally, which is fine. The liberals should take it. Great, but if you really want people to buy in, conservatives can look at it from that angle, right? That's really great to hear. I don't know. Is there anything else, Sarah? Anything else you want to walk through? The data. I'm glad to hear that the data that you're willing to have us share, that allowing us to share that data, because it's really invaluable. We really envision it going a long way with, sharing it here locally, counties and towns, because it's the clinical research is fine. We talk about, everybody wants to hear Johns Hopkins, but for me personally, that data is more compelling because it's actually relevant to a state regulated program. Yeah,
it's our neighbors. It's the local population. It's a real population.
Yeah.
Totally. And are you guys doing any, because I know you've worked very closely with Heroic Hearts, and the good bit of the data in this annual report is from military groups, if I understood the report correctly. Are you guys doing any more veteran specific data collection to help sort of, because that's such a huge speaking point?
So from the data we collect, we'll be able to kind of pull subsets of different demographics and do kind of mini reports on that. So we will do that. But we haven't, like, Heroic Hearts is doing their own research. So when we partner with them, they've got their own research project they're working on. And then otherwise, Heroic Hearts is an amazing program. And they traditionally took veterans from all over the country and then flew them to Peru for a session. And what was great working with them starting last November is they wanted to see what happens. Let's keep it local. So their first cohort was all Central Oregon veterans, which means we've got to keep in touch with them. So normally a Heroic Hearts program is 6 weeks. In the middle is a retreat. And then the veterans return home and don't have a lot of opportunity to reconnect. And here we have monthly meetups with the veterans that have gone through. They're engaged in different community programs. And then as new cohorts have come through, they get to engage with the earlier cohorts. And so building this community and really seeing that sort of that synergistic effect of how psychedelics is not a here's your treatment, your cure, go home. It's a way to build community with a lot of individuals who were very isolated before and are now openly engaging in these growing communities. So we're seeing that, which has been wonderful.
Wow. That's, I mean, as beautiful as it is to travel to either Jamaica, Costa Rica, Peru, you do lose touch with that community and can feel quite isolated. What a beautiful takeaway from that, and even more reason to have them available here in the US, and to have organizations like yourself that is helping to, and other organizations that are helping with that integration and community part. That's a really powerful message for all other states, like moving on, the importance of keeping people local so they can go to weekly, monthly, support organizations.
Yeah.
Is there anything else, Ryan, that you want to add that maybe we haven't, or sorry, Joe, go ahead. Do you have another?
I was going to say, we have 5 minutes left. We can just, do final parting thoughts. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing this. So we learn something every time we speak with you. So thanks for doing this live with us. Yeah.
My pleasure. And this is exciting to hear about what New Jersey is working on. I used to follow all of the national news, but I've been so focused on just Oregon that it's great to come up and see, oh yeah, this is still going on and people are making good progress and doing the work out there. So very happy to help, and excited to keep chatting as you move forward and as we learn more out here in Oregon.
Totally. I feel like we are looking to, in a lot of ways, looking to Oregon of like, okay, how can we continue improving as you guys go through any sort of growing pains and work around? So this has been really an awesome conversation and just illuminating for things we need to keep in mind moving forward. So thanks for, really being at the forefront.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
All right. We'll talk soon.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much, Ryan.
Have a good one.